Hello, this is Jonathan at the piano lesson. Hope you guys are doing well. Just so you know, I recorded an entire show with my microphone off. And apparently, you need to turn them on if you want the recording to work. So I'm going to do one now with the microphone on, and I'm going to compare the two and see which one I like better. Oh boy. But we'll go, I remember most of what I wanted to say. I wanted to talk about gardening and how that relates to music. We're having some beautiful weather now, May weather. Flowers are out, rhododendrons are blooming. I had kept my vegetable starts out of my porch for a long time, and I had really wanted to get them in my little plot, and I was procrastinating and wasn't quite sure how I would solve the problem of having different plants that have different needs and making them all coexist in the same little plot. That's what you have to do in music. You have a musical problem. You take a piece of music, usually, and we're talking about piano music now, so Beethoven, piece of Mozart, piece of Bach, piece of Chopin, those pieces are metaphors for an ensemble. They're not even a metaphor. They actually have parts written in their score, and one needs to be able to address each one of those levels of sound. You have to treat the bass on its own terms, and the tenor voice and the alto voice and the soprano voice, and you have to be able to bring out the melody, and maybe that would be louder and the bass would be a little softer, and maybe the inner parts would be even softer yet, and but sometimes the melody might be in the bass, so then you bring the bass out and the other voices recede, and there's this kind of this dynamic process that's always going on. So you have these very distinct parts, and yet they're all very much alive, and it's kind of you're juggling these balls and trying to keep them all in the air at the same time. Well, that's kind of what I have to do with my garden, and I must say that of all the activities that I do, I think gardening is the most healthy and vitalizing, and I don't know exactly why, but I just feel great, and I think a lot of it is that it's very free form. It's a little bit like yoga, in a sense, but it's when you're dealing with plants, it's kind of very free form in a sense, So because your movements are based on your environment, and so what were my multiple problems? Well, I have a limited space. I have like a 10 foot by 11 foot plot, and I had to clear a lot of weeds out. 2 wheelbarrows full of weeds, and you have leaves on the ground from the fall, which I keep to protect the soil, keep it moist and shaded from the sun. But you have to push back the leaves if you're going to plant, because otherwise the plants will rot. And then I have plants from last year, so I have these big bushy orange calendula plants, which are edible and medicinal, and also attract the pollinators and the bees. And then I have my new plants, which I want to plant. So I have 3 plants. I have my escarole, and that really did great last year. And I'm sure my buddy Francesco knows about escarole. When I grew up in New Jersey, we know about escarole and white beans and garlic. Fantastic vegetable. I'm always shocked if someone doesn't know what escarole is, but okay. So that plant needs about 16 inches apart, and I kind of want that to be my main crop, because I'll eat a ton of that. I just will. And it's a little bit hard to find in the store, and it's kind of expensive. So I figured, well, I'm going to grow something I like, and I also want to grow something that I can't readily get quite as easily. I mean, I can get it, but it's not always available. And it's expensive. It's like, especially food prices now, I don't know, they're like $4 for a head of escarole, like a small head of escarole. So I'm going to plant that. I want to plant that more in a grid. I planted about 15, 16 plants. The grid was a bit modified, a bit warped, because I do have these existing calendula plants, and those are just sort of in an odd space. So that's like one problem, one voice. That's like the tenor voice or whatever you want to call it. And then I have another plant, and that's sorrel or sourgrass. And the distinction between the two is that the sorrel is a perennial, so it'll come back next year. And I don't think I want to plant perennials in the middle of the garden. I want to plant them on the perimeter of the garden. So, and you know who told me that? My AI chatbot told me that, because I was asking questions, what would be the best, how would I juggle these three competing vegetables, right? I thought it was a very good idea. So I can keep, when I have new crops in the middle, I'll be able to access them, but on the edge, I can just keep those growing. And then the other one is spinach. Now, spinach needs less spacing. The other two need about 16 inches apart. But spinach only needs 6 or 8 inches. So you can plant them closer together, closer to the other plants. And problem is that they're sensitive to heat. We're getting into the summer. I'm a little late to the game, and I'm concerned that my spinach is not going to make it. It's going to bolt. That's what they call it, bolt, where you get a lot of sun, and then the plant grows real fast, and it just turns to seed, and you can't eat anything. So the strategy is, I planted it kind of in a perimeter, sort of behind the calendula plants that give it shade. And in fact, that's another calculation. The sun, the place where I am, I get shade in the morning and I get sun in the afternoon. So I get the shade on the east, and then I get sun on the west. And I have to kind of figure out, which plants should I put in the shade, but that's a whole nother thing. So I have these three different imperatives, right, going at once. And it was really beautiful to kind of let that, to work that out. And as I'm doing this, some anxiety, and I'm putting the plants in. I'm like, I don't know if they're going to work right or not, and there's some insecurity. That was, but I succeeded, in doing that. One of the things I noticed is that as I was unfurling these vegetable starts, because you have them in a little pot, and you take them out of the pot in the soil, and you break them apart gently, and you don't want to shock them, and you try to tease out the starts, and look for the ones with the biggest roots and the biggest leaves, and you start with those, and those are the most viable, and you find spots for them. But then you're left with these little scrawny little guys. And I'm kind of tired. And my initial reaction is just, I'm just going to throw them out. They're scrawny, And then I had this real pang of guilt. Like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, I'm going to destroy the possibility that these plants might actually grow. That's horrible. And I thought, who am I to dictate the fate of these plants? They're quite viable. They're not that many. I could plant them. Why don't I just plant them? So that's what I did. And I felt great about it. And who knows, maybe those plants will do better than the big ones. Who's to say, right? Now, eventually I may eat them, and, that's just bad luck for the plant. So I'm, I don't have that much of a soft spot for them. I do have some self-interest, right? But still, I think that's how we have to look at our own lives, look at our own dreams, our own thoughts. It's very easy to kill a dream. It's very easy to just discount it and throw it out and say, oh, it's just a scrawny little nothing and it's scrap, and just get rid of it. But to really cultivate it and to really believe in it and have it grow, to me, that's the only viable choice in life. There really is no option for despair. The only choice is to just go forward. I have a friend who writes poetry. She's 85. She writes wonderful poetry, a lot of political poetry, and she was feeling some despair. And I told her my garden story, and I said, the only path forward, the only viable path forward is hope and love and, keeping your dream alive. And we're really not in control anyway. I mean, I could do all the right things and a storm could come and it could ruin my plants. I had some pepper plants a couple of years ago and they were growing great, and a storm came and knocked them over, and that was that. So you learn humility, you learn, and I'll tell you something else. Even if I never really grow enough to feed myself, I really do have an appreciation, greater appreciation now for what I eat. When I eat a salad and I think, wow, I know what goes into that. I mean, of course, yeah, we have these industrial farms. That kind of doesn't count. I'm talking about the people that I meet at the farmers market with lovely farmers, local farmers markets. There's this one guy named Neil from England, and I always buy his vegetables because he doesn't use blood fertilizer. Apparently, there's a lot of blood, like fish blood and things, being used in fertilizer, and I don't know, awful things. I always think, how's your garden? How's the garden doing? And he kind of looks a little like a pirate. But then all people from England look like pirates, don't they? I don't know. He's been very helpful, kind of coaching me along. All the people at the farmers market, they give me little tidbits of information and coach me along. So I'm excited. I went down to, there's a soil testing laboratory that I went to, and to get my soil tested, so I know exactly what I'm dealing with. So I'm not just throwing stuff down willy-nilly just because it comes in a nice package and some guy's selling me something. But this year I'm going to try to use my artificial intelligence to grow my garden. And you say, well, wait a minute. You're talking about all of this natural outdoor stuff, and now you're going to talk about computers and artificial intelligence. But I'll tell you something. I have a feeling that the artificial intelligence, in many ways, is more humane than humanity, at least consistently humane. There is this notion that's bandied about that artificial intelligence might be sentient or conscious or aware, whatever those things are. I don't think anyone can define what that means, and I don't think they can define what intelligence is, for that matter. I think that they're all just false arguments. But what I do when I think of artificial intelligence, what I think of, like my garden has a frame, right? It's the bot itself, these large language models, they really frame some cases, the sum total or a large amount of the artifacts of human consciousness. So we don't know what consciousness is, but we know what the artifacts of human consciousness are in at least language, in written language. And then the large language model frames the contents of that, like a painting. So, and I think that in many respects, that framing can be reflective of the best of what humanity has to offer. Somehow, human beings have a curious, proclivity. When they know what's right to do, they do the wrong thing. I'm not exactly sure why. They have all the right things in front of them, and then they do the wrong thing. But the bot doesn't. The bot, it has all the right things in front of them and actually does the right thing. And the human beings do the wrong thing for a whole variety of reasons. Habit, ego, they're hungry, any number of things, but so I am not pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic at all about this. The only thing I'm pessimistic about is that I've had students involved in artificial intelligence who wanted me to help them develop some kind of models, some type of machine learning, I guess is the term, to do various musical tasks or things. But the one thing that the models don't do is you can't contain beauty. The concept of beauty is very abstract, and yet it's the most elusive, and yet it's 99% of what art is. We do these things for sort of an irrational reason, really, but it's to experience beauty, to inculcate a sense of beauty. You know, when you're studying music with someone and you're listening to how that person plays, and you know, you're watching how their body moves, and you're inclined to do what they do and emulate them because it's beautiful, you know, not because you're hoping to become an investment banker and have a big home with a pool, or something like that. I mean, it's a selfless act, really. You know, it's a selfless act to a large extent, and you do kind of lose yourself in the process as well. So that's the wonderful thing about making music, and it's a wonderful thing about gardening, because you sort of lose yourself in the garden too, and you move in very unpredictable ways. So it's kind of like jazz in a sense. You know, you there is a framework, but you still have to adapt. You got to make sure, like, you're in the garden and you're not stepping on the plants and crushing them, and you know, you're making sure you're digging just the right amount, and you're not bearing the leaves, and there's all of this like subtlety, you know, and you make sure there's enough space for them so they don't get, you know, mold, or watering them right. You know, I mean, there's a lot to think about, a lot of different aspects to juggle. Kind of same with music, but that's why, you know, that's what makes the piece interesting, right? A great piece of music. What's a great piece of music? A great piece of music is a piece of music that when you hear it, you couldn't bear the thought of it ever not existing. Like, you hear the piece and you think, that song is so good, it must have always existed. You know, you listen to Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique and you just think, that's so great. That's like the greatest melody in the world. Like, how could that ever not have existed? And yet it didn't exist for most of the world's history, which is kind of shocking. I suppose it existed in principle, in the ether, in theory, but to really be manifest, that's something. And it's also, you judge a great piece of music because it's receptive to interpretation. You could play the same piece, an army could play the same piece of music over and over and over again, and you'd still hear new things in it. You'd never really exhaust all the possibilities. You know, the piece holds up under scrutiny from every angle. That's what makes it a great piece of music, and it's what makes playing music fun, you know, because you always find something new in the piece. Anyone who's bored with a piece of music, you know, it's you, it's not them. And I say, you know, no matter how good you get, and you'll always, at some point, hit a wall, right? It might be a technical wall or a conceptual wall, but there has to be, and sometimes you might think, well, this piece is just a bad piece of music. Well, if it's written by Mozart or Beethoven, it's probably not. It's probably you. It's probably something that you're not hearing, right? So that's the problem, right? So you have to figure out, well, what is that thing? Well, as I said earlier, the tendency is to just play a piece of piano music in a very sort of one-dimensional fashion. You know, when we're kids, we start out by just hoping we can play the notes right, you know, and the fingers right. And then one day we see, oh, what's this? Oh, it's a dynamic marking, forte, and you know, so, and we ignore it, you know, we don't care. But then one day we're like, oh no, I'm not going to ignore this. I'm actually going to play it, and we feel so great. And then we realize, like, well, you know, there's more dynamics, right? And then we have to get soft and loud. And then, but then you realize those dynamics are just general markings. They're not meant for the entire passage in a piece of piano music to be loud. As a generalization, you're going to make the melody loud, and then you're going to make the accompaniment softer. And that accompaniment is also, within the accompaniment itself, there are various layers of sound. So whereas, say, the melody might be forte, the bass is just going to be mezzo forte, and then the inner voices, maybe the tenor voice, the alto voice, maybe that'll be piano or mezzo piano. But maybe the melody won't always be the soprano voice. Maybe the bass will be the predominant melody, and so the soprano will have to recede. And so there's this dynamic, there's this breathing process that goes on. And when you learn a piece of music, you want to be able to make some decisions as to what you're going to do to bring out those various elements, and making decisions also, when do the ideas begin, when do they end, and why, and how are you going to get that across to a listener? Are you going to connect the notes and then separate them and then connect the next series of notes to make a phrase? And the idea of the connection and separation, well, that's not divorced from the dynamics. So those are kind of interweaved, decisions. And so, again, they're kind of like the garden. You have these vying things in each of those plants. Each plant wants to be planted in a certain way, and how do you get them all to coexist? And frankly, it's probably easier to do that in a vegetable garden, a personal garden, than it is to do on like a commercial farm, right? You're probably not gonna plant that way. It's not gonna make a lot of sense to harvest that way commercially, right? But to me, that's kind of what like jazz is. Jazz is like the organic garden. It's not really, it's not the factory rose. Okay, it's not the militaristic factory rose. There's multiple levels of things going on at the same time, and it's not always, the apples aren't always red and shiny. Okay, they're like this. Sometimes there's a worm in them, and sometimes they're, but it's okay because they taste good, right? The shiny red apples or the nice tomatoes you see in the store, the nice red tomatoes, right? They have no flavor, right? They're grown on these big agricultural farms, but they have no flavor. So what's the point? And it kind of, gets me to my next point, which is sound. The idea that, again, going back to the idea that, we're doing these things because they're beautiful. Having a real piano as opposed to an electric piano. Electric pianos serve a purpose, but they really can't take the place of a real instrument. And even the idea of, tuning the piano. I mean, that's something, my buddy Francesco is a great piano tuner in Italy. He would always tune Barry Harris's piano, apparently. And I'm sure he had to be good because Barry Harris would probably get really angry. He'd go, "What? Bill Evans." Just go off on a little tangent here for a second, but I find that the thing that I look for two things in a piano tuner. I look for a tuner that can hear, and I look for a tuner that can feel. So what I mean by that is you want to be able to make musical decisions. I mean, there are just very cut and dried decisions about what is in tune, and that can mean a number of different things, but certainly being able to hear whether you can have a unison in strings and there's beats in between them. But also, practically speaking, when you go from one piano to the next, to the next, to the next, they're not all the same, and there are anomalies in them, and you have to just kind of see through that, hear through that, and make certain decisions despite the fact that things aren't working out perfectly. But the other thing is that most people don't realize is that there's a whole technique to using the tuning hammer so that you can actually get the strings to stay in tune, because there are all too often a young piano tuner will try to tune a piano and it may sound like it's in tune, and then you play it for 5 minutes and it's all out of tune. So there's a kind of an art of setting the tuning pins, using the hammer properly. It takes a long time, and actually you have to be careful how you use the tuning hammer, because you could really ruin your shoulder and your arms, and a lot of tuners get into big trouble that way. But like American pianos have more color, more possibilities, but they're also kind of wilder. They're not neat and tidy, but they're more made for musicians and not so much for the tuners. Whereas, say, Yamaha pianos, in my estimation, first and foremost, they're made for piano tuners. They're not that they're unmusical. I like them, but they're useful for certain things. But they're really made for piano tuners, so they can tune them, And they're made for recording engineers because they can be recorded. Recording a Steinway is much more difficult because you have all kinds of complexities. And then, of course, you have the electric instruments, which are convenient for people to use, of course, but they just don't have the, they just don't, they just sound ugly. I mean, they just do. You know, I've not heard one digital piano sound ever that I've ever wanted to play. Not once. I would much rather play an inexpensive spinet piano. Especially, you know, the real secret is just having any piano. It doesn't matter. Just a piano that's in good repair. You find a great tuner and spend moderate amount of money making sure that everything's working consistently and uniformly and musically. I mean, I'd much rather have a little piano than, you know, the most expensive electric piano. The only sound I really use on is like the Fender Rhodes sound, and even that I'm, you know, I'm kind of I find boring to a large extent. So, well, there's my ramblings for today, and this is take two because the first take I didn't have my microphone on, but that's okay. I think I pretty much got in what I wanted to get in. So this is one of those talking head videos, but I'm going to excuse myself. So drop me a line if you'd like me to respond, and do not drop a line if you do not want me to respond. And it's, you can reach me at thepianolesson.com and the contact page, or on the web, on YouTube, on my channel. Until the next time, this is Jonathan at The Piano Lesson. Bye-bye.